system than there are in college, because the homicide rate for young black males is astronomical in our major cities, the #1 cause of death. We can't afford that, because for every one of those young people that we keep from going on that path of self-destruction, that's one less person you have to protect yourself from and protect your family from. That's one less person you have to pay for in the penal system or the welfare system. One more tax-paying, productive member of society who may discover a new energy source or the cure for AIDS. We cannot afford to throw any of them away. And yet, those young black males, kindergarten, first grade, second grade, they're just as good as students as anybody else. They pay attention, they're cooperative, but as they start getting into the higher grades, something starts to happen. You know, need to be cool, need to fit in, that peer pressure starts kicking in. And then, you know, they start reading about American history. And they notice there's not many people in that book that look like them that contributed to the development of our great nation. And then they say, well, maybe next year when I take world history, but next year they take world history and the same thing happens. And they say, well, what did my ancestors do? And then they come home and they turn on TV. Oh, there I am, playing basketball, football, baseball, rapping in those baggy pants, acting a fool on some sitcom. And you begin to develop an impression of what success for you is. And it does not include being a nuclear physicist. You know, why is it that everybody knows who Janet Jackson is, but few people know who Shirley Jackson is? Shirley Jackson, the first African-American woman to get a PhD from MIT, a nuclear physicist, was the first female to be chairman of the Nuclear Regulatory Commission, the president of the AAAS, the largest scientific organization in the world, the president of Rensselaer Polytechnic Institution. We should know about her. But you know the only way they're going to know about her in the black community is if she learns how to rap or shoot a 25-foot jump shot. Then she'll be on the front of Ebony. But otherwise, it's not important. We need to change that. But you know, those young black males, they didn't have to suffer that fate. You know, by the time they realize that they're not going to be the next Michael Jordan or the next Puffy Daddy or whatever, you know, it's too late. And now up drives this big black BMW with tinted glass, and out steps this tall guy with jewels and furs and women. You want to be like me? I can show you how to get all this stuff. And beside that, society sold you a bill of goods, and you deserve all this stuff. And the next thing you know, you're looking at the 6 o'clock news, and you see this guy being led away in handcuffs, trying to hide his face from the camera. And you say, that's little Johnny, having committed some heinous crime. He was such a good boy. What happened? But what happened to little Johnny happens to little Johnnies all over this country, hundreds of times a day. And it didn't have to happen, because anybody, regardless of their ethnicity, could have taken little Johnny by the hand when he was 6 years old and walked down the streets of Peoria, Illinois, and could have given him a black history lesson he would have never forgotten, that would have thrilled his soul. They could have started by pointing to his shoes and saying, you know, it was Jan Matzliger, a black man who invented the automatic shoe lasting machine, which revolutionized the shoe industry throughout the world. And you step on that clean street, you tell them it was Charles Brooks, a black man who invented the street sweeper, those machines with the big brushes, and down that street comes one of those big refrigerated tractor trailer trucks. You tell them it was Frederick Jones, a black man who invented the refrigeration system for trucks, later adopted for airplanes and trains and ships. And that truck comes to a stop at the red light. You tell him it was Garrett Morgan, a black man who invented the traffic signal. And while you're talking about him, you can tell how he invented the gas mask, saved lots of lives during the war. And while you're talking about the war, Henrietta Bradbury, a black woman who invented the underwater cannon, made it possible to launch torpedoes from submarine. And you'll see a beautiful black woman walking down the street. A black man did not invent her, but you can use that information, that time, to talk about Madam C.J. Walker, a black woman who invented cosmetic products for women of dark complexion, was the first woman of any nationality in this nation to become a millionairist on her own efforts. And you'll walk past the hospital. Charles Drew, you can talk about his contributions to blood banking, understanding the function of blood plasma. Daniel Hale Williams, the first successful open heart surgery in the world, had an operative mortality rate less than 1.5%. You look up at that surgical light, Thomas Edison. You didn't know he was black, did you? Well, he wasn't, but his right-hand man, Lewis Latimer, was, and you can tell how Lewis Latimer came up with the filament that made the light bulb work for more than 2 or 3 days, how he invented the electric lamp, did pioneering work in incandescent and fluorescent lighting, diagrammed the telephone for Alexander Graham Bell, was a tremendous inventor in his own right. Most people never even heard of him. You'll walk past the railroad tracks. Andrew Beard, the automatic railroad car coupler, spurred on the Industrial Revolution. Elijah McCoy, the automatic lubrication system for locomotive engines. In fact, he had so many great inventions. When something new would come out in the industrial arena, people would say, is that a McCoy? Is that the real McCoy? That's where the term comes from. You got racist people like David Duke talking about the real McCoy, don't even know who they're paying homage to. And you know, and I'm just barely scratching the surface. You know, and you know, the fact of the matter is, there is no reason that young man should not feel fully a part of this nation and look out for the welfare of this nation. But you know what? I can take that same walk down the street, and I think Dr. King would emphasize this. And I could point out tremendous contributions that were made by every single ethnic group in this nation. And our diversity is not a problem. It is a strength. And it's the reason that we reach the pinnacle faster than any other nation in the history of the world. We need to remember that. You know, I was asked by an NPR writer, reporter, doing an interview. She said, Dr. Carson, I notice you don't speak about race very much. Why is that? And I said, it's because I'm a neurosurgeon. And she looked at me kind of quizzically. And I said, you see, when I go in the operating room and I take that scalpel, and I open that scalp and I pull it back and I take that bone off, I am now operating on the thing that makes that person who they are. It's not the covering that makes them who they are. And you know, you have that perspective, and it makes all the difference in the world. Makes the difference in terms of how you look at other people, how you treat people. You know, when I was an intern at Johns Hopkins, and I don't have time to go through, you know, the whole story of how I went from being a dummy to being at the top of my class. Suffice it to say, I had a mother who thought it was important to read and to turn off the TV. And it worked. And it worked. But when I was an intern at Johns Hopkins back in 1977, virtually any time I would go into one of the wards with my scrubs on, one of the nurses would say, Mr. Brown isn't quite ready to be taken to the OR yet, assuming that I was an orderly. And I would say, well, I'm sorry he's not ready yet. I'm Dr. Carson from the Neurosurgery Service. And they would turn about 18 shades of red. And I would say, no need to be embarrassed. I would be very nice to them. And do you know what? I had a friend for life. They would do anything for me at that point. But you know why I didn't get angry? Because I had a big picture. I realized from the perspective of that nurse, every black man she had ever seen come on that floor with scrubs on was an orderly. So why should she think something else? And you know, a lot of times we get angry and we ascribe motives to people unjustly. And it's not because they're bad people, it's because they're ignorant. They simply don't know. Our job in those circumstances is to educate people. And I think that's what Dr. King would be saying today about the rancor that is going on in our nation. A wise man once said, a house divided against itself cannot stand. And yet, what is happening in our nation? Democrats hate Republicans. Republicans hate Democrats. And we keep going back and forth, from the right to the left. This was not the plan for our nation. If you go back and you read the writings of Hamilton and Adams, and especially Ben Franklin, I think the Lord gave these people a special wisdom. And they talked about how important it was to compromise. You know, during the First Continental Congress, the whole thing was about to explode. Small states, large states, different opinions. Everybody had different opinions. They could not come to an agreement. There was a riot about to occur. Benjamin Franklin hit the gavel and he said, gentlemen, stop. Let's get down on our knees and let's seek wisdom from God. And that whole assembly knelt down on their knees and they prayed. And when they got up, they said, we are going to come to consensus. It wasn't easy. It took 60 ballots just to determine how they were going to elect a president. But they were determined to work together, and they put together a constitution that is better than any that the world has ever seen. And that's what can happen when we work together. We got to stop demonizing each other. That was the intention. Nobody ever expected everybody to agree, but they expected some give and take. Nobody is right 100% of the time. And when we use our collective intelligence, that's what representative government is all about. We, the people, are the ones who are going to have to insist on it. Because honestly, I think many of the leaders have lost their minds. They have forgotten that it's a representative government. They don't really care what the people think. They know better than everybody. This is not the way it was supposed to be. You know, the symbol of the eagle, Hamilton says, for an eagle to fly, it has to have balanced wings. This is where the whole left wing, right thing came from, by the way. And he said, you know, the right wing is the conservatives. The left wing are the liberals. He said, but if you tilt it on one of them, the eagle's going to crash. If you put too many conservatives in, they tend to conserve. So you get nothing done. You put too many liberals in, they have all these ideals, but they have no constraints. They'll bankrupt the country. That's what they said. You know, 200 years ago, they said that. They said, you got to balance them off. And this is what we, as the people, are going to have to insist on, recognizing that nobody is always right and nobody is always wrong. And when we begin to work together, and we begin to work together for the good of the common people, I think the strength of our nation will be amazing. And I think we will be able to lead the world. We will be able to demonstrate what fairness is all about. I don't think there will be the necessity for other people to be trying to destroy us, because we're doing a very good job of destroying ourselves. But we can do this. We have the ability to do this if we will just reach down inside of us and ask ourselves, who are we? And when we think about success, do we just think about accumulating for ourselves? Or do we think about others? There was a time in this country when if somebody's barn blew down, guess where everybody in the neighborhood was? Over there helping them build it back up. Not looking for a lawyer to try to sue somebody, but trying to help build it back up.